At 11:45 p.m. local time, cartel lookouts reported drones overhead. Gunfire lit the night sky. They thought they could protect their bunkers with steel doors and underground corridors. Hours later, just after 2 a.m., silence fell. Why? A different weapon had been unleashed, one that doesn't need to pierce bunkers because it turns the very air inside into fire. That timing wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, and it shows the new blueprint for these strikes. Cartel bunkers, Project Strength. Thick concrete walls, reinforced steel doors, and lookout rings manned by sentries with radios. Many cut into hillsides or buried under farmland. These aren't makeshift hideouts, they're engineered fortresses meant to control not only the ground above, but the tempo of any fight. From a distance, they look permanent, sealed, self-contained, and built to absorb punishment. For years, that design delivered. Conventional strikes scarred the terrain and blew apart surface structures, but the core spaces, the labs and tunnels, remained intact. Operators could shelter during a blast, then return within minutes to keep production running. The architecture didn't need to hide the facilities. It needed only to resist intrusion long enough for the work to continue. That resilience built a myth. The idea that these complexes were untouchable, immune to the tools usually fielded against them. Reality proved more complicated. Reporting has described covert U.S.-Mexico operations that did break into some of these strongholds. According to those accounts, the missions used surprise, intelligence cues, and speed. They worked at times, but at high personal risk for operators on both sides, and they brought political friction with every incursion. Mexican units risked blowback in their own communities. American involvement, if exposed, risked arrest or diplomatic fallout. Surveillance increased too. Reporting shows U.S. flights and clandestine efforts were stepped up to map the networks from above. But mapping is not neutral. Each flight carried political risk, and intelligence gaps remained, even with better eyes, in the sky. The pattern was clear. Neither airstrikes nor raids offered clean resolution. Think of those early raids as punching armor with a bare fist. You can bruise it, maybe even crack it, but your own knuckles take the damage. Every break-in drained resources. Every operation absorbed time and political cover. Washington wanted pressure that left no doubt, something that wouldn't bleed out through slow attrition. Meanwhile, the bunkers exploited a simple advantage. They rewrote the physics of attack. By burying deep and layering steel, they redirected shockwaves. Soil and rock absorbed pressure. Oxygen remained. Light and breathable air lingered even after heavy bombing. These weren't immortal fortresses, but they altered the environment enough to survive what had once been decisive strikes. That changed the equation. So pressure kept building. Law enforcement tactics weren't enough. Punishment from the sky barely scratched the core. Raids drained energy without shifting the balance. The myth of safety still stood, reinforced by every failed attempt to break it outright. Planners asked the same blunt question. How do you target the environment of a bunker itself, not just the walls guarding it? So if raids and standard airstrikes weren't enough, what tool could change those calculations? The answer pushed policymakers in Washington to reconsider who they were up against and what categories they belonged in. Something was about to shift at the highest levels of government, though most people didn't catch its full meaning at first. In Washington, the conversation about cartels took a sharp turn.
And it's time for America to wage war on the cartels, which we are doing.
The label shifted from organized crime towards something heavier: foreign terrorist organizations. Reporting indicates that early in the administration, several of the largest cartels were reclassified in a way that broadened U.S. counterterrorism authorities against them. It wasn't a televised decree. It was a legal adjustment, quiet on the surface, but it restructured the battlefield. For decades, the fight had been framed around crime. Law enforcement filed cases, judges issued warrants, agencies coordinated along borders. The approach mirrored old anti-mafia playbooks: surveillance, controlled arrests, limited raids. The vocabulary was criminal justice, not combat. Then the designation landed. Cartels were suddenly grouped in the same category as foreign militant networks, actors who had already plotted and executed mass casualty attacks overseas. Overnight, they weren't suspects in a courtroom, they were enemies on a list of global threats. Reporting says that reclassification unlocked new legal pathways. Intelligence and military units could press further with wide-area surveillance, hold drones above targets longer, and at least consider strike options. But caveats matter. Officials told reporters that no final operational decision had been announced. The designation expands tools, but it doesn't erase the legal and diplomatic checks, or the debate over how and when to apply them. Inside U.S. agencies, the tone began to change. You no longer had to view a bunker as private property hiding contraband. You could now treat it as a fortified site operated by a declared hostile group. That shifted the legal boundaries and authorized systems that had previously been off-limits. It meant signals could be monitored under counterterrorism rules, and assets trained for irregular conflict could be tasked against them. Beyond paperwork, the political consequences came fast. Mexican leaders publicly warned against unilateral U.S. military action. They insisted cooperation had to respect sovereignty, rejecting the idea of Washington striking targets inside their territory without approval. That constraint remains one of the biggest barriers to escalation. Sovereignty is not a technicality. It's the firewall that can block or enable every mission. At home, U.S. officials argued the logic of the designation. Cartels weren't just crime families smuggling contraband. They operated transnational networks with firepower rivaling militias. From that perspective, calling them terrorist groups wasn't symbolism. It gave policymakers cover to bring advanced tools to bear. Drones, special operations units, financial blockades, and strict prohibitions on anyone providing them material support all became easier to justify under this frame. The contrast was sharp. Yesterday, these groups were pursued with case files, phone records, and police raids. Today, they were defined in the same space as insurgents. That change marked the difference between serving an arrest warrant and drawing up a strike package. And Washington now had more latitude to blend intelligence collection with overt military pressure. Cartels felt the shift too. Observers close to the ground reported that over their strongholds, drones stopped being just cameras. They started to circle with intent. Even if strikes weren't publicly acknowledged, the constant overhead presence carried a new weight. It meant that surveillance no longer looked neutral, it looked preparatory. That perception matters. When a drone lingers above a compound for hours, recording every truck that enters and exits, the people underneath adjust. They dig deeper tunnels. They build secondary escape routes. And when they feel threatened enough, they put weapons skyward. That's the environment you need to picture now. Armed groups treating aerial eyes not as distant observers, but as targets themselves. The shift in classification reframed the conflict, but it also provoked adaptation. Because once you redefine an enemy, the battlefield itself begins to evolve. And soon, it wasn't just about what Washington authorized. It was about what happened when the drones hovering above those compounds started taking fire. Picture a drone circling slowly over cartel ground. Its sensor scans the landscape, transmitting every movement below. Then muzzle flashes kick up from the compound. Tracer rounds streak upward, carving through the dark as gunmen try to swat down the silent machine. In that instant, the mission changes. Surveillance becomes survival. These patrols are not just flying cameras anymore. They now feed into operations where targeting lists evolve in real time. Strike packages sit ready, and distant platforms wait for the signal. What used to be passive watch missions fold directly into live attack planning. Cartels have adapted. Reports confirm they have fired at drones, sometimes bringing one down, sometimes forcing aerial assets to shift. They've responded by driving their leadership further underground. They've expanded tunnel networks, carving extra shafts for escape and dispersal. Protection, once crude, now resembles engineered defense. Layered redundancies designed to scatter personnel and safeguard core structures. Drones still excel at tracking moving convoys or boats skimming rivers. They can hover for hours and shift grid by grid. But when the vital infrastructure lies buried under reinforced concrete and rock, the drone's eye shows only the outline, not a weakness. That design was meant to resist direct punches from conventional weapons. This back and forth revealed a truth. Light air power harasses and drains, but it rarely destroys the nest itself. You could smash vehicles, collapse sheds, or pressure convoys. Yet the fortified nodes, the labs and bunkers, endured. Think of it like whacking a wasp with a stick. You might kill a few, but the hive survives. So planners looked beyond. Reporting indicates discussions moved to higher-rung options. Stealth-oriented aircraft and long-range strike platforms that could hit hardened sites directly. Instead of risking drones loitering over hostile fire, some reports describe debate over stealth bombers like the B-2. Platforms designed to bypass regional radar and deliver specialized weapons in a single sweep. That concept remains at the level of planning and consideration, not execution. The technical premise is clear. Older radar systems common in the region are far less effective at detecting low observable aircraft than at picking up conventional jets. Stealth isn't invisibility, but it narrows the window for defenders, making surprise more likely. For crews concealed underground, that could mean no sirens, no early warning, just sudden impact. That line of debate also shifts the weapons in play. Traditional warheads blast with casing and fragments. They crack doors, fracture walls, and collapse surface sections, but hardened bunkers shrug off much of that. Thermobaric munitions function differently. They ignite dispersed fuel in the air. Oxygen becomes fuel, and in confined chambers, the reaction amplifies. Waves rebound. Pressure surges, and survivability inside drops to near zero. Still, skepticism lingers. Experts have told reporters that even if stealth bombers delivered thermobaric strikes on cartel bunkers, the strategy may not halt production completely. Many fentanyl labs operate at smaller scales, often in simple buildings that can be rebuilt quickly. Strikes might disrupt, but by themselves, they may not end the flow. That caution tempers the allure of dramatic strike options with a recognition of limits. This is the shift worth watching. The move from watching compounds with drones to considering strike aircraft designed for fortified targets reflects the changing battlefield. Cartel adaptations force planners to ask harder questions about escalation, effectiveness, and political fallout. And it sets the stage for the next key piece. Not the planes that deliver the attacks, but the specialized munitions themselves. Because the weapon under consideration doesn't rely on steel fragments or brute shock alone. It turns the very air around its target into the instrument of destruction. The weapon at the center of this debate is often called the bomb that breathes air. Thermobaric warheads spray a fine fuel cloud, then ignite it. The blast draws on ambient oxygen, creating an extended pressure and heat pulse that is far more lethal inside confined spaces than a conventional blast. In open ground, it manifests as a massive fireball, impressive but not fundamentally different from other large explosions. Inside a bunker or tunnel, though, the effect changes. The shockwave has nowhere to escape, so it rebounds off walls and ceilings. Pressure compounds, fire expands through passages, and oxygen vanishes in seconds. That distinction is what makes these weapons uniquely suited for hardened sites. Traditional bombs hit like hammers. One violent strike, sharp and brief, focused outward. Thermobarics seep into the environment itself, using corridors and sealed chambers as fuel and channels for force. Against defenders in a confined stronghold, the odds of survival shrink close to zero. The concept has roots that reach back further than many realize. Engineers traced early versions to the First World War, when German forces experimented with incendiary shells that scattered burning chemicals into trenches. Decades later, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. tested the CBU-55, an early fuel-air munition. It showed promise but also flaws. Wind drift scattered the fuel cloud unpredictably, limiting effectiveness. Lessons from those trials carried forward. By the late Cold War and into the early 2000s, specialized BLU series penetrators appeared, designed specifically for caves and tunnel complexes. Reports say the BLU-118/B was engineered for fortified sites in Afghanistan. One account describes a mission in 2002 when a BLU variant detonated prematurely above ground. What followed was classified, leaving only fragments of the story in open sources. What mattered is that the weapon family was refined with the hardened target in mind. Even large-scale variants entered discussion. Reporting sometimes compares certain fuel-air bomb concepts to yields measured in tens of tons of TNT. These figures underscore potential scale, though details remain scarce and often contested in open sources. Still, the trend line is clear. Thermobarics evolved through testing, problem-solving, and operational need into a category built for environments where normal munitions falter. Legally, they occupy a gray but defined space. There is no global treaty that bans thermobaric weapons outright. Existing instruments, especially protocols under the UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, do restrict how they may be used. Anything targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure falls outside lawful use. Against hardened military or militant installations, their deployment is permitted. In short, nations can develop and possess them, but their application hinges entirely on context. For militaries, that framework makes thermobarics the most powerful non-nuclear option for collapsing underground sanctuaries. The danger isn't about cracking walls or piercing armor. It's about turning walls into resonating chambers and stripping out the breathable air inside. No steel plate can shield oxygen from ignition. No tunnel depth can scatter waves that rebound and multiply within enclosed volumes. For cartel fortresses, that analysis cuts deep. Designs based on blast doors, sealed corridors, or hillside burrows no longer guarantee safety. The very protections that once frustrated raids and conventional bombs become liabilities under thermobaric attack. Heat, pressure, and suffocation are not stopped by thickness of concrete. They are carried by it. The calculus shifts from whether a bunker can hold to whether anything inside can outlast the blast environment. That, in turn, makes the choice of delivery system decisive. Matching the munition to a platform that can strike without notice completes the threat picture. And it leads to a larger realization. This shift isn't about more powerful explosions alone. It is about the boundaries of safety themselves and how much ground cartels can still claim as protected. What's changed is the U.S. toolbox, and with it, the stakes. Weapons once reserved for counter-terror missions are now openly discussed in the context of cartel strongholds. Bunkers cut into hillsides, once expected to resist conventional strikes, now face concepts built to consume the air inside. Forward planning shows a battlefield in motion, but actual use depends on policy, law, and diplomacy still in play. If this analysis matters to you, like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and why this matters to you. This is tactical change with strategic consequences, and every move will matter well beyond a single compound.